Good evening, my name is Jean Seaton and I am the director of the Orwell Foundation, and it's my great pleasure this evening to announce the winner of the 2020 Crick Prize awarded by The Political Quarterly for the essay in that wonderful magazine that was set up in the 1930s to bring clarity and great research around politics and clear thinking to a much wider audience. The essay that has won this year is by Martin Laughlin from LSE. What would John Griffiths have made of Jonathan Sumption's Reith Lectures? This is an extraordinarily clear and forensic account of two different traditions in thinking about politics and the British Constitution that goes back to Tawney. And we are enormously proud to be sponsored at Orwell by the Political Quarterly, and we're very proud to announce this really important essay in 2020 as the winner of Bernard Crick's Prize.
Hello, I'm Ken McDonald. I'm chair of the Orwell Foundation, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this online ceremony for the Orwell Prizes 2020. Each year, the Orwell Foundation awards prizes for pieces of writing that, in the estimation of our judges, come closest to realizing Orwell's ambition to make political writing an art. Fundamentally, George Orwell believed that political writing, that public discourse, should be moral. He believed that if demagogues succeeded in persuading people that nothing is really true, or that it's difficult to distinguish between true facts and false facts, this would destroy people's confidence in what is real, and it would open the gates of power to liars. And in his greatest work, Orwell showed how unfair, how cruel, how violent a world ruled by liars could be. But also fundamental to George Orwell's allegiance to moral writing, to moral public discourse, was his belief in the right to speak freely. Or as he put it, the right to say things that other people don't want to hear. The Orwell Prize celebrates political writing as an art, and it also celebrates the right to speak freely. Now, earlier today, we announced the winners of the Orwell Prize for Journalism and the Orwell Prize for Exposing Britain's Social Evils. The winner of the Journalism Prize is Janice Turner for her remarkable series of articles on Brexit Britain. And the winner of the Orwell Prize for Exposing Britain's Social Evils is Ian Birrell for his equally remarkable pieces on vulnerable people in care. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be handing over to Stephanie Flanders, who's head of Bloomberg Economics and chair of our panel of judges for the Political Writing Prize this year. After she's announced the winner, we are going to show an exclusive interview with Richard Blair, George Orwell's son, and also with Jean Seaton, the director of the Orwell Foundation. And then we'll hand over to Jude Kelly, who's the director of the Women of the World Foundation and this year's chair of the panel of judges for the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction. I'd like to thank all of our judges who have done a really fantastic job this year, shown enormous care and commitment to their task, and have alighted upon what we in the foundation believe are a wonderful and thoroughly deserving group of winners for 2020. But this isn't the final Orwell Prize for this year, because later in the year we'll be announcing the winner of the Orwell Youth Prize. And it is, I think, very encouraging that at this rather strange time, over 1,000 young people have submitted entries for this prize, submitting essays on the topic of the future we want. And we look forward very much to announcing the winner of the Orwell Youth Prize in due course. But for now, let me hand over to the chair of our panel of judges for the Political Writing Prize, Stephanie Flanders.
Well, this was an exceptional time to be judging the Orwell Prize. I mean, we had the same spirited discussions, which I suspect judges always have, ought to have, in deciding this very prestigious award. But I think we were especially pleased this year at the very wide range of books on that shortlist. In subject matter, in style and scale, they really run the gamut. And the lesson, I guess, was that almost any book can be a contender for the Orwell Prize. It just has to be really, really good. The fact that we were deliberating in a time of pandemic, I don't think changed the way we felt about the quality of those books, but it did give them special resonance, and I think in the end did help us make our final decision, which was unanimous and not so very difficult, all things considered. The winner of the Orwell Prize for Political Writing for 2020 is Kate Clanchy for her book, Some Kids I Taught and What They Taught Me. Kate, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. I'm so moved and so grateful to receive this prize. These are the memoirs. One way of looking at this book is that it's the memories of a school teacher, and school teachers, as part of it says in the book, are not taken seriously in so many different ways, not taken seriously as politicians, and not taken seriously as intellectuals, and not taken seriously as artists. So for this to win the prize for political writing as art means so much to me, and I hope it will mean a lot to many teachers out there, because if maybe there's one thing the pandemic has taught us, is that teachers are very important and very necessary, and that schools are our communities. They're the things that can pull the community together, and without them we've ripped a big hole in our society, and we need that to be joined back together. So this is the prize of all prizes that I would have wanted, and I couldn't be more pleased. I'd just like to thank the judges. One of the reasons I wanted this prize was I thought the judges were so great, and I very much wanted your good opinions, and I'm so grateful to have them, all four of you. I want to thank my editor at Picador, Chris Doyle, and my agent, Zoe Waldy, who, goodness knows, they put up with quite a lot from me. I'm always changing what I'm doing. I started this book 10 years ago. When they signed me up for it, I don't think it looked very promising. They took a detour on the way to publish a book by my school children. They do everything for me, and I'm so glad that this has come through for them. I'm really glad. I know at this point that quite a lot of writers say that they're going to give the money away. I'm not actually going to say that, because I do quite a lot of self-funded projects, and I will be carrying on my work working with young people, and this will definitely help. But I think it's also, this award also says to me that my writing is important, and my words on the page and my art, and I'm going to spend this £3,000 on my writing and spending some time doing some of that, and I'm also extremely grateful for that. So thank you again. Thank you so much.
Hello, I am Jean Seaton, the director of the Orwell Foundation, which is more of a project than merely a prize. And we'd very much like to thank our fantastic sponsors, without which we could do nothing. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation, University College London, where we aren't, sadly, the Political Quarterly, the long-term sponsor of the prize, and Richard Blair, who is George Orwell's son, who we're very honoured and excited always, as always, to have here tonight, who, with AM Heath, is the direct sponsor of the Fiction Prize, which you're going to hear about next, but also a tremendous supporter of our wonderful Youth Prize. Richard, thank you very much.
Not at all.
I just wanted, given that we've all been through lockdown and COVID, to ask you what you remember about your father's long-term disease, which was tuberculosis. You grew up as a little boy in the shadow of it. Can you remember TB?
When we lived on Jura, he spent a lot of time writing. He was very disciplined in the sense that he spent all morning typing, come down for lunch, go back up in the afternoon, carry on typing. But every now and again, he would have a problem with his bronchitis. But he also knew, and certainly by the time he went to Fairmyres Hospital in Glasgow in 1947, that TB was what he was suffering from. I think he knew he probably had TB for quite some time. And having TB, of course, was a very infectious disease in those days, and still is. He had this terrible problem, of course, obviously, of wanting to bond with me as father-son. At the same time, he had to distance himself from him to me, so that I wouldn't catch tuberculosis. In the event, certainly in his letters, he does say that he has this problem, but nevertheless, that Richard is a very robust child. And he went to a great deal of trouble to buy a tubercular tested milk cow for milk. So in many ways, I think really the robustness of my health probably made him feel a little less anxious. But having said that, TB was infectious and he had to take those precautions. And I think this is maybe the one thing that really caused him quite a lot of grief.
I mean, in TB was in the middle of the 20th century a long-term terror. There were cures of relative success. How did he manage what we might call physical or social distancing when you were a little boy?
Well, I suppose for me, well, bear in mind, of course, that when we lived on Jura, there was only my father, myself, and to begin with, his younger sister, Avril. So it was just the three of us.
So you were a social bubble. You were a bubble.
We were a bubble, indeed.
Thank you, Richard. I think it feels like a very pertinent story. It was a disease that was terrifying, that was mastered. But when you lived with it, you had to choose. He chose to keep you very safe. I think that's the interest.
Yes, yeah, he did. I think that was his primary quest in life, I think, was to make sure that I didn't contract this terrible disease. I congratulate all the winners for their contribution to the spirit of George Orwell, who famously wrote in his essay, Why I Write, written in the summer of 1946, "What I most wanted to do is to make political writing into an art." This, of course, is the motto of the Orwell Prizes. The essay goes on, and I quote, "I write because there is some lie that I want to expose, some fact to which I want to draw attention. And my initial concern is to get a hearing. It seems to me that it is this last part that has been a common thread in recent years, for the simple fact that thinking writers have always wanted to expose those things which are plainly untrue or skewed, and that, if not challenged, may become the new truth. I hope you will all continue to uphold the principles of decency that my father extolled."
Thank you so much. And I would now like to move on to the last part of the evening and introduce Jude Kelly, who's been the chair of the Fiction Prize. Jude.
It was my privilege to be the chair this year for the George Orwell Prize for Political Fiction. And it was our privilege as a group of judges to read the most extraordinary, stunning selection of books. And of course we read them twice, because we read them as the long list and then we read them again as the short list. And every single one deserved a huge amount of respect. And we'd recommend all of them. I mean, they were brilliant. So it was quite a complex meeting when we met on the 29th of May to think, who do we want to be the winner? We talked about genre, what does political fiction mean? We talked about style, we talked about the impact and resonance of the subject matter, and we talked about what turns something into a classic. But in the end, even though we had a very in-depth debate, we had a completely unanimous moment when we in our hearts thought there is only one book that's going to win. And actually, I think we all felt that this book was something that when we'd first read it individually, we had a hunch it was the one. For lots of reasons. The agility, the flow, the wonderful, uninhibited storytelling, the narrative is so beautifully structured. And then the very searing, intelligent, in-depth investigation of structural injustice. The central character who grabs your heart immediately. You so much want him to succeed. You so much fear for him. And you know that the likelihood of him succeeding in the world of racial injustice is very unlikely. And then, of course, against this brutal backdrop, somehow a moment of real hope happens. And the ending, which is a surprise, also leaves you with a feeling that, unbearable as so much of the narrative is, there's a reason for following it through to the end, because actually it does leave you feeling that the world can be better and will be better, and that reliance on human sense of justice is something that will bring us through in the end. When we made the decision, it was a few days after the killing of George Floyd, and we didn't know that the backdrop of Black Lives Matter, as it justifiably rages through society, would become something which would make the book even more relevant. But what we did know, and what we do know, is that this book will have an enduring life. So I'm delighted to say that unanimously the judges have decided to give the George Orwell Prize for political fiction to The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. And here to receive the prize is Colson Whitehead.
Hey, howdy, Colson Whitehead here. I'm here to say how delighted I am that the Orwell Foundation is recognizing the Nickel Boys. When I was writing the book, I wasn't sure how well it would travel. It's an intimate story. It's about two Black boys in 1960s Florida. And I was curious to how it would travel overseas. And I was delighted that it did find an audience abroad for unfortunate reasons. The story is very universal. When I was in the United Kingdom, people would say, oh, this reminds me of the Magdalene Laundries, or this reminds me of St. Mary's Home for Unwed Mothers. In Canada, people would say, this is just like our residential schools. For decades and decades, the Canadian government would take Indigenous children, take them from their families, and put them in schools to educate them in white culture. And the same sort of abuses happened. In Australia, they had the same sort of residential schools. And of course, right now on America's southern border, we have incarceration camps where refugee children and immigrant children are being held in terrible conditions that echo some of the things that happened in Dozier, the real life model for the Nickel Academy in my book. It turns out that Elwood and Turner's story happens anywhere that the powerful can inflict their will upon the powerless, where there's a culture of impunity that allows these sorts of abuses to happen. So once again, thanks so much. I'm delighted to be in such a wonderful company among the finalists and the other recipients of this year's awards. I hope that you stay safe and wear a mask. Mask it or casket, as we say in the Whitehead household. And I hope to see you guys soon. Thanks a lot.